Introduced in Season 4's The Wounded, the Cardassians represented a previously unmet Alpha Quadrant species, one that would go on to become a major antagonist across multiple series. And a new species needs a new alien ship. That job fell to senior illustrator Rick Sternbach. What's up, Plastic Addicts? I'm trying something new. I'm gonna do a little preview of the studio model, a little bit of history, if you will. Little mini doc. So if you're not interested in that, just go ahead and skip ahead to whatever time code I put on the screen. Now, I'm really bad at remembering scripts, so I'm going to go off my book here. Rick presented his initial drawings to the producers, and after some discussion, he was asked to, quote, give us something really weird. Taking some direction from the character design, the elongated forehead oval in particular, Sternbach was inspired to integrate an ancient Egyptian aesthetic. Desert yellow with cobalt blue and Chinese red accents, the pyramid-shaped disruptors, and the altar on the upper hull were all meant to evoke the Egyptian feel. It was approved, the drawings were passed on to Ed Muriecki and Tom Hudson, and they only had 3 weeks to build the model. No small task, considering a highly detailed studio model needs an internal framework with multiple mounting points and a complex internal lighting system. However, they pulled it off and delivered a 37-inch model that went on to appear in 7 TNG episodes, 14 DS9 episodes, and 2 Voyager episodes. I'm not going to focus too much on the parts overview because we're going to come back to that at the end when we're discussing the overall thoughts on the model. But I do want to say, I miss this box art from a few years ago. This basic blue space background, very simple and elegant, and I liked it. As far as the parts, it's not overly complex. We've got a large upper and lower hull section, and then we've got the side pieces. We got 2 of those, the bridge module, additional pieces, the tail mandible, and the cover, and of course the clear pieces. And I got the supplemental decal set, which does a lot of heavy lifting on this model. I apologize, I can't remember the proper name for it, but these side pieces have the overlapping lip instead of just a joint that butts up together. So that's really great, especially for light leaks. The only drawback is it takes a lot of effort to get these pieces on just because everything's a little bit loosey-goosey. It's not an issue of bending or warping, but just take your time and just glue a little bit at a time. You can also add crazy glue to either end and then just start filling in the middle. So you got a couple options. One of the things I really like about this kit is the secondary detail that they have created on separate sprues, so it's not molded into the model, and this gives you just a little bit of additional detail that really sets it off, even though these are relatively small pieces. The tail bulges, the altar, and these rectangular pieces on either side of the upper hull. Where the port and starboard bulkheads meet the lower hull forward, the seam isn't great and it's going to need some work. But there's also a little bit of overhang. So I'm going to do a couple things here. I'm going to use the knife to knock some of that down, just to reduce the amount of dust caused by sandpaper. I'm also going to use the knife to scrape off these raised window frames, because I'm going to be using the kit supplied decals. And same thing as before, I want to keep this dust to a minimum, so I'm also going to do a wet sand when I smooth everything out. I had planned for this to be a fairly quick but good build, so I opted not to do the windows and just use the darkened window decals from the kit. But that doesn't mean that there still isn't a lot of work involved to light the rest of it, to give it that feel of a Galor class. As you can see, I've opened up a number of areas where lighting elements go. The impulse vents, I'm going to call them the warp grills, at the front of the ship. That seems to make the most amount of sense. There's also all these little tiny holes around the hull. That's for the disruptors, and those are going to have very specific lighting. And as you can see here, I did light block the inside of the ship. Let's put the two halves together and just make sure the impulse opening is actually open, and you can see light passing through there. And the same with the warp grill openings and the deflector opening. Unfortunately, I lost some footage, but I did get photos of this, and this is my first attempt at pre-shading, which I saw from aircraft modelers. So I went over all the seams with a black paint, and then did another base coat, a thinned base coat, so you can see just a little bit of detail coming out, and I'm hoping that'll step it up in conjunction with the decals. The rest of the detailing is pretty straightforward. It's all just a brown paint. And this is nice because it gives me a chance to use the brush, which is a nice change every now and again. By and large, the airbrush is the primary tool, but there's something relaxing about this. Put some music on, get your brush out, and just start hitting the various areas that need it, and just take some time and enjoy the process. Here I've laid down chip on board LED strip. This stuff is really good because there's a lot of LEDs. They're close together so you're not getting hot spots. But this is meant to just blast light on the inside to light the warp grills and the deflector. Now what I'm showing there is the 0805 pre-wired, pre-resistored SMDs from HDA Model Works. I'm using one per disruptor. On their own, these are fairly bright. They've got a lot of great applications. Luckily, the clear plastic will step it down a little bit to make it a little bit more in scale with the rest of the model. The rear mandible took a little bit more work because it's a completely separate piece, so I had to drill a much larger hole to slide the resistor through. But once that was done, the layout was the same. Glue it in, or pardon me, UV resin it in, turn the power on, and boom, we've got a mandible disruptor. With the disruptor lighting done, the next step was to just connect up all the LED strips, hook it up to power, and put the two halves together just to make sure that all the light is going where I want it to go. Previously I'd mentioned that the seam between the port and starboard bulkheads and the lower hull was pretty bad, but once you glue the two hull halves together, that seam is terrible all the way around the model. It's a lot of work at the forward end because you don't have that sensor trench hiding a lot of it. So that meant filling, sanding, priming, prime checking, touching up, reapplying base coat, and just making sure everything was nice and smooth and ready for decals. I really have to applaud Round 2, AMT, etc. for creating these Aztec decals on this reissue of the model. Now, for those who aren't familiar, this was a separate purchase. It didn't come with the kit, but it was a really nice supplement because it allows you to build the model in a way that really makes it pop, that completely imitates the studio model. Now, could you paint all this? Absolutely. I can think of a couple model builders who would go to that extent. But for me, building this as a shelf model that was meant to show up in the background of videos and just to accomplish something, the painting the Aztecs, wasn't really a consideration. Especially because I really do like working with decals, especially wallpaper decals. They're challenging, for sure, but the ability to get a very good effect with far less labor than painting it is absolutely winner for me. And they're good enough that I've had a number of people comment on the paint job, and I've had to clarify that thank you, but Round 2 did all the work here. These decals are doing a lot of heavy lifting to really set this model up. And here I'm putting the windows on because I opted not to drill and fill and light the windows. I want to, as I said, a more simplistic build. And these really serve the purposes. Oh, and my favorite part, putting on the pennants, registries, names, etc. All these clear plastic pyramids, these are the actual disruptors on the ship. And what I did, I had to clip off the little alignment peg on the bottom, use microcrystal clear with a smooth bottom, pop those right on. Now the thing that they often portray as the main weapon is actually supposed to be the deflector. And this took a lot of patience to mask, as you can see me removing the masks. It was a very lengthy process, and it was very, very satisfying to pull them off. For simplicity, previously I just blasted the interior with white light. Now the clear parts are painted, so this has got clear red on the back, so that when I apply the power, the red shows through. And unfortunately the molding wasn't perfect, so I had to do a little bit of filling for where the warp grills go, so I actually used the clear resin and the same transparent orange I used on the clear pieces to fill that in. And all that brings us one step closer to the end. Here is the almost finished model. Everything is applied, the decals are on, the lights are on, whatnot. The clear coat isn't on yet because I still need to do some weathering. Now the weathering is just going to be an overview because I lost footage. Thank you, airdrop. Anyway, I'm doing an oil wash. This is actually a pin wash I'm doing here. So we've still got the gloss coat on the model, and I'm just letting the oil paint flow around the raised areas, and just trying to bring those out and make them more apparent is the intent with this process right here. But I also gave it a general wash where I just kind of covered the whole thing, and now I'm using a cloth to wipe it away, kind of give it some grimy, streaky effects, which work to some extent, also brings out some extra detail. But this is something I'm still learning, so I've got a ways to go on this to refine my techniques, but for this model it actually worked exceptionally well. I'm quite happy with the results. So for the first time I'm doing this post-build review, final thoughts. I don't really have a name for it yet, but I want to go over the good and bad of the model, and none of this is particularly bad, especially given that this model was created in '96, I think. Anyway, this is one of the more challenging parts, and it just takes patience because of it's not even poor fit, except at the forward area where you can see where my thumbs are. It's just because of the nature of the parts, it's floppy, loosey-goosey, whatever you want to call it, so it just takes some time to get this glued together, and as I mentioned before, I actually did use a little bit of crazy glue to hold one end and then move on, but this area here needs attention. And as far as seam work goes, the whole seam, where the upper and lower halves meet together, is terrible. It doesn't line up. But I can't call it bad given the vintage of a North American model kit. It's just a thing we have to deal with as modelers, so just be ready for it if you get your hands on one of these kits. I know if I do one again, I'll be more than ready for it. I can't recall if I removed the alignment pegs on this kit. I do find that helps, like on the 350 refit. When you build the nacelles, there's a big step between the two halves, and I removed 98% of the alignment pegs, just let the big forward one, and that allowed me to hold it together while making adjustments throughout the process of gluing it together. And coming back to the Galor Class, as you can see while I'm rambling, how much time is spent just applying filler to this kit. Then you've got to sand, relight block, rebase coat, check for defects, do touch-ups, etc., etc. So besides the decals, which are much more gratifying, this is probably the most lengthy part of the build. And then you get these guys. I'm calling them the warp grills, as I said. It seems to make the most amount of sense to me. The fit isn't great, even with sanding and whatnot, but I did find a way around it, and that is just using this UV cure resin, so I can fill the gap and then use the same clear orange to to paint the resin and give the same effect without having to mess around with excessive sanding or excessive filling. And the result is pretty good, although one thing I learned, if you do this, be very careful because the resin will want to flow into the baffles of this part and kind of smooth it out, although you do still end up with the same grill effect. And here I am applying the clear orange from Tamiya, which is my go-to for clears. I do believe AK makes some now, I'm not sure. Anyway, Tamiya clear orange, red, blue, green, yellow, and smoke are things I keep in my inventory because I need them quite a bit, especially working with Trek ships. And I wanted to bring this part up not because it's bad. The part itself is great, but the masking process is a bit tedious. There's so much to do. The lines aren't super crisp, so it's easy to get bleed. So once again, just beware of that. And I think the final real bad spot is here. This does need a little bit of opening, so test fit it, sand it, cut away material, etc. But once you get that fit, it just, click, pops right in, and you're good to go. And that is my build of the Cardassian Galor Class warship, which I'm very, very pleased with. This has kind of become one of my favorite ships in the Star Trek universe. I'm not sure why. It may just a combination of shapes and colors, but I would definitely do this again if I can ever hold one, or get a hold of one, excuse me. And I would do the windows next time. But I hope you enjoyed this build, and I hope you come back to the next one, and please let me know your thoughts in the comments.